So it's a great pleasure and privilege to have a chance to talk to Michael Proctor, the Provost of King's College, who I've known for a little while now. Michael, I will start with when and where you were born.
Okay, so I was born in Bournemouth, in what is now, I believe, Hampshire, but was Dorset, or the other way around. My father was in the army and was serving at Bovington Camp with the cavalry, and he was in some army house, of course, of which I have no knowledge, near Lulworth.
And when?
That was in 1950, September 1950. So I think I was there with my parents for a year, and then I was christened in Lulworth Church, and then my father was sent to Germany to the British Army of the Rhine, which was based in a place I think called Bunda in North Germany, and we were there for the next, I think, 2.5 to 3 years.
So your Wikipedia is completely erroneous. It says you're from Lincolnshire.
No, that is also true. No, I was born in Bournemouth from a Lincolnshire family.
And your father was a farmer?
He was a farmer. He became a farmer. He was the son of a farmer and the grandson of a farmer, and way back to the 18th century. And the Proctor family is still a large farming presence in South Lincolnshire. And he was one of 3 sons. My grandfather, who was a very poor farmer, managed to survive the Depression by selling some of his land. And so my grandfather had 3 sons, 2 of whom became farmers eventually, my uncle and my father, and the third one became a solicitor and moved to Teignmouth in Devon. So my father left school in 1938 and was thinking, I think, of entering medicine, but then the war came along and he never went to university. Instead, he joined the army and fought in the war in the 16th 5th Lancers, which was a cavalry regiment. So he was a tank commander and ended the war as a captain in the regiment, fighting in Italy, having fought in Egypt during the war.
So this is your father's side.
This is the father's side. Mother's side, more obscure, from Shropshire. So my mother was one of 3 children of my grandfather, Stephen Jones, who I think was a school teacher, but he became a school teacher, but I think he had terrible problems in the First War, health problems of some kind, which I don't know much about, but his health was clearly affected, and he ended up not as successful as he would have wished, and was a bit frustrated, I think, with life. And they lived in Shrewsbury. And my mother went to Shrewsbury High School, the girls' school, and my uncle John went to Shrewsbury School, which is where I went actually later, completely unconnected. My grandfather, for some reason, sent my father and the brother who did farming, to Shrewsbury, halfway across the country, while they were living in Lincolnshire. This makes no sense now or later, so he was there, and so that was why I went to Shrewsbury School.
Did you know your grandparents?
Yeah, I knew. Yes, I knew. I knew my grandfather on my father's side quite well. So he died when I was 8. And in fact, the last couple of years of his life, he lived in our house, or we lived in his house. And I would go and see him in his study. I have this great memory of his study, which was suffused with pipe tobacco, amazing smell. And we would play chess according to his rules, which are completely erroneous. You weren't allowed to move backwards in his game, so it was a very difficult game to play.
None of the pieces?
No, none. No, not just pawns. Yes.
You ended up with all the pieces
at one end, exactly, yes. But of course, I was far too young to question this. On my mother's side, my grandmother on my father's side, she died when I was 5. I dimly remember her. She had heart problems and died early. She was also from farming connections in Lincolnshire. My grandmother on my mother's side lived to a great age, and I knew her quite well. She died when I was about 30, probably. And I don't know what her background was. I know very little of the Jones side of the family. But I think she lived locally in Shrewsbury in her youth. And there are still a lot of relatives whom I don't know living in Shrewsbury.
Tell me something about your parents and how they might have influenced you, their character, what they were interested in.
Yes, okay. So my father, he was very interesting. So he'd had a sort of traditional sort of country life childhood, tennis, bridge, skiing, all that stuff. None of which he ever taught me. It was most peculiar. For some reason, he never felt that I should be doing the things that he himself had done well. It wasn't that he didn't want me to excel in them. He said he didn't think they were good. I don't think he really perhaps enjoyed his childhood very much. It was perhaps a bit limited. I think my grandparents were a bit staid, had a very narrow life. You know, the bridge and going to the Rotary was about as much as he could manage, apart from farming. And my grandfather was also a church ward and alderman, all these respectable things. My father never wanted to do any of these things. So he was a bit of a rebel in that way. And I think he never talked about the war, but clearly it influenced him a great deal. And as he got older, he spent more and more time trying to meet up with colleagues and going to cavalry reunions and things. I think it was a terribly important part of his life, but he didn't talk deeply about it at all. I thought he was quite, in the end, quite liberal-minded. I mean, at a time when corporal punishment was not unheard of, he never did that. And he always seemed to me very fair. He was a great model builder from his youth. So he tried to get me interested in Meccano, and mainly Meccano, actually, and building model aeroplanes. I was not as good as he was, so he used to do most of the work, and I would look on admiringly. That was fine. And shooting, and all the usual country things, not riding, but shooting. And so I did all those things, and he was, he did all the things he was supposed to do, but he was a bit buttoned up. I remember there was a hilarious moment when he said to me, "You know the facts of life, don't you, Michael?" It was when I was about 12. And I said, "Of course, I knew nothing. Of course I knew everything." And he said, "Well, that's all right then." That was the end of the conversation. He was not good at that sort of thing. But he worked very hard on the farm, and I'll come to the relationship with my mother. He didn't go on with my mother, so that wasn't very good for him at home. So I think it was a slightly narrow life for him. My mother was she was very active in the war. She drove ambulances in London, and then later she went to Egypt to help with the resettlement of demobbed soldiers, and that's where my father met her, because he was stationed in Egypt in 1950 or so. 48 they got married. And I think initially, before children came along, it was quite glamorous. There was a lot of skiing and lying on the beach, drinking. And she liked that life, but she was not prepared for the life that she encountered in Spalding when my father left the army, because my grandfather was getting old, and helped him out. So in 1955, 4 or 5, we moved to Spalding in Lincolnshire, and it wasn't glamorous anymore. And the Fens are rather narrow place socially, and I think she felt herself above all these things. So she never made any friends to speak of. It was already depressing, and she became very depressed and difficult. And he had to cope with it, which he did loyally, but it didn't do him any good, I don't think.
So she wasn't particularly interested in reading or writing?
Oh no, she wanted to succeed, I know, and she did all that sort of reading things. I even made her make plastic models. but she gradually got worse and worse, and more introspective, and stopped driving, which isn't very good because we lived in the country. And she did become depressed and was on pills, and actually really needed psychiatric treatment at a time when, of course, there was a great stigma attached to it. So it was very difficult for my father, who never complained publicly. But I remember very well that there were never any parties. Nobody ever came to dinner. It was a very isolated existence. And eventually, sadly, she probably committed suicide eventually. It's not certain, but when I was in my 20s, she took a lot of pills and didn't wake up. And she was very depressed at the end. So it was terribly sad. And there was nothing anybody could do about it. And she also took to drink, which was awful. So the last years of her life, the dinner times were just impossible, because she was completely over the top by dinner and would rant and rave at everybody every night. So it was very, very wearing. So, I'm getting ahead of myself now. As a result of that, I was quite happy to escape and go to America a bit later, but that was a bit later. So growing up, I went to a little primary school, pre-primary school, I don't know what you call it, run by an old lady in her garden with about 20 pupils, it was wonderful. It was very good. And even though the facilities were non-existent, she did teach us quite a lot. except that she stopped me being left-handed, I think, because I remember picking up my pen or pencil with the left hand, transferred to the right hand. It was quite common in those days.
And that's continued, has it?
I still write with the right hand. I can write with the left hand, but I dig left-handed spade. And so I went on from there to a prep school in Seaford, and at that time there were like 12 prep schools, all little, in Seaford. Something to do with the wonderful gravel subsoil and the good sea air. It was very fashionable. Yeah. Again, miles away from South Lincolnshire. Sort of crazy decision.
Where is Seaford?
It's on the coast. It's between Eastbourne and Brighton.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Yes. And none of these schools have survived, actually, interestingly. But so it was a school with about 50 pupils. It was very small, and 5 teachers, owned by the headmaster. But it was a very good school for me, and I did extremely well.
It was a boarding school.
It was a boarding school, yeah. And it was, the headmaster was interested in the intellectual education of those old boys, of course, of the boys, and he had his firm views, but he'd been to a good school, Winchester. No, yes, was it Winchester? Yes, he was at Winchester, and then at Balliol. So he had high standards, which he instilled in us, and I did very well there because it was an academic environment, and I was unfortunately branded immediately as a SWAT, top of the class, and there were 5. I remember 5 forms. There must be more than 50 pupils actually, but there were 5 forms, and at the end of my second year I was in the top form, aged well, yeah, because they didn't know what to do with me.
Aged 10
or so, yes. And then I was 3 years in the top form, and got special teaching, and so it was clear quite early on that I was going to be a scholarship candidate for secondary school.
Were you particularly strong in mathematics?
Well, actually, I was pretty good at everything, I have to say, without being too modest. Mathematics didn't stand out, no. And in fact, I never thought of it as my best subject. I was better at classics. But so I took the scholarship exam to Shrewsbury, which is where my father had gone, and I was the top scholar. So it was actually
top scholar to Shrewsbury.
To Shrewsbury, in 1963. And this was very good actually for my parents, because farming was not lucrative at that time, and they were quite short of money. And in those days, the scholarships paid for about 2/3 or more of the fees. So I was able to go there, and
just returning before you leave that age, between 8 and 13.
Yes.
Did you have any particular enthusiasms and hobbies apart from model building, or reluctantly?
It's mainly model building. What else did I like doing? Well, I played a bit of chess, but very badly. I was not good at that sort of thing. Still not. And I was very bad at games, because I was large and short-sighted. And, so I did a bit of rugby. I mean, it was a school that played rugby and football and cricket.
When did you start wearing glasses?
I was about 10, I think. I remember it was a rare event, going to church, actually. And my father used to... Well, I must tell you this story, actually, that my father, having been the son of a church warden, was expected to bring the family to church. My mother never went. And so he used to take us 2 boys, me and my brother, my younger brother, and we used to leave before the sermon. And the reason he gave out was that we, the boys, would not be interested in the sermon. The real reason was he didn't want to stay there any longer than he had to. So he didn't become an officer of the church in any way. Anyway, yes, he asked me to read the hymn board, and I couldn't read the hymn board. But I hadn't realised before then that I was short-sighted, remarkably.
At the age of 10?
Yes. So
school didn't realise?
No, it's on that, isn't it? I don't know. Well, I've just thought of something, actually, which is I was almost always in the front of the class.
I was going to say.
Yes. Yes, after that it was fine.
Music? Were you musical?
No, I never played an instrument. In fact, it's quite interesting. The schools at that time, certainly the school I was at, there was group singing, and you could take piano lessons that were extra, but it was pretty low key, actually, all that sort of thing. Extracurricular stuff was not emphasised. So it was all stuff for the exams.
Okay, so You went on to Shrewsbury.
I went to Shrewsbury, which was a great school. I really enjoyed Shrewsbury, in spite of the fact that I was not good at games, which was not a good thing in the 1960s. Especially the top scholar couldn't run. It was all right in the end. Of course, there were plenty of
flagging still, was there?
Yes, it wasn't called that at Shrewsbury. We were called scum, as I recall, and dowels. Shrewsbury had a language all of its own. It wasn't the absurdly personal type that used to be in the past. No warming of lavatory seats or anything. But yes, you had to perform personal tasks for the older boys, like going to the shop and getting some food and things like that. Making beds, because I remember eventually I was head of the house, and I remember issuing a rule saying everybody must make his own bed every day, which I guess had not been the case in the in the past. But it's a funny thing that although it sounds now awful, I don't think it was abusive. It was expected, the younger boys expected to do it, and then in their turn to have the power. And in general, of course, not always, the older boys were, they asked people to do things, but they were not abusive in doing it. So I didn't feel I was scarred by this experience.
So you weren't bullied at any stage?
I wouldn't. No, I wasn't bullied at school. I mean, I was not popular, but I wasn't bullied. And the older boys, some of them, recognised that I was intelligent and would appreciate that, so I could talk to them. I guess some of the boys, they were not very intelligent.
Were you beginning to have any enthusiasms there? Were you debating, acting, music?
No, I was never a good actor. No, I was pretty boring, actually. I did a little bit of debating. We all did debating. That was fun. I did sport. I did a bit of rowing, but it was very low level. I enjoyed that and still enjoyed it much more later. Other artistic things, no, I could never draw. I didn't learn a musical instrument. I tried to learn the piano as a little boy, but no, I wasn't enjoying it, so I gave up. I bought a guitar at one point, but I never had any lessons. I could do something with it. Inspired by Bob Dylan. So I tried to learn his songs, yes. Oh dear, never mind. Eventually I became a football referee. So that was I got my school colours for refereeing, which is a bit of a cheat.
Referee.
Yes. Other than that, no, I listened to a lot of music, classical and pop music, and got on with my work, actually. I was a very boring child.
Were you beginning to get into some stream at this point?
Well, I was...
A-levels?
Well, yes. So the first... we used to... I'm just trying to think. We arrived in the fourth form, but and there was no specialisation. And then gradually, I think after the third year, when you got into the sixth form, then there was serious specialisation. And by the time I was in my second year, so there was a prize offered every year for mathematics. There was a written paper. And I took this exam and got the prize in my second year out of 5. And therefore I was branded a genius in mathematics. And even though actually I'd won some other prizes, which are more appropriate to my age, after that, I believed everybody who told me I had to go into maths, which I did. Yeah.
That's what you did, maths and physics?
Maths and physics, yes, very conventional. Maths and physics A-level, and I might have done biology, except I was put off by having to dissect rabbits. So possibly it wasn't the right thing for me. But in a way, I'm sorry now, because the things that have happened in biology since I was a student are so enormously interesting that I'm quite sorry I didn't take that path. But too late now.
This is an age, sort of 15 to 18.
Yes.
When people often go through their most religious period, they get confirmed and so on, and question the meaning of life and so on. Did you go through it?
No, in fact, the norm at Shrewsbury was to be confirmed in the second year, and I said no. I had my doubts, and the housemaster, who was actually a man of the cloth, was very understanding and didn't criticise me at all. So I haven't been confirmed. But I went along with all the stuff, of course. But I don't think my parents they weren't very sad about this.
What is your present?
I'm pretty agnostic, bordering on atheist. I've got no hope of the afterlife whatsoever. But I do like the music. I like the sense of tradition.
Yes, many of the masters of Cambridge colleges I've interviewed
Yes.
have been in that position, and I have asked them how they manage it, particularly in King's College Chapel, presiding in these, and they say, well, I like the music or something.
Yeah. No, I grew up with it. At school in the 1960s, I was at chapel every day and twice on Sundays, so I know all the hymns, know the form of the service. It's quite reassuring, really. And I love the music. I think it's just brilliant. The church music, I love it. I get bored a bit with the services, but you have to take the rough with the smooth.
I forgot to mention you have a younger brother.
I do, yes.
Henry,
that's right.
And he curiously went on to Eton.
So he was also at Shrewsbury as a pupil, and then he was at Trinity again, like me. But he's a historian, and he didn't know what he wanted to do. And in the end, he decided to be a school teacher. So he went to Eton. That's been his job for many years.
So from Shrewsbury, you applied to?
I applied to Trinity.
Only Trinity?
Well, I can't remember. It was the CCE in those days. You might have had to put down a choice. I definitely put Trinity first. I remember, mainly because I had no idea, of course. I had no idea. My parents hadn't been there. And luckily, the person who was teaching me maths in the sixth form at Shrewsbury had been at Trinity. And he said, of course, you must go to Trinity. So I applied to Trinity. And that was fine. I remember an Oxford Don coming to the school, and I was introduced to him. And he said, why are you going to Cambridge? Why are you going to Trinity? All the difficult question to answer. Well, my teacher told me. Anyway, I got in with a scholarship, so that was all right.
And how was that?
Well, it was good. I mean, I learnt very quickly that I wasn't as clever as a lot of them, which is a very good thing to learn. And in fact, my career, I did get first throughout my time, but they were not stellar ones, and I struggled a lot with the supervisions, and I relied a lot on cleverer people to help me out. So, with the problems, but of course the exams I did on my own, and they did all right. So it wasn't wildly, I wasn't destined for glory in academia, I don't think, at that stage.
Who were your teachers?
Now, well, so there's a guy called David Marr who died tragically, who was a big person in computer science. He was absolutely wonderful. Bella Bolabash, who is still alive,
yes,
and as a graph theory, he was very particular, was very Hungarian, and very particular, and very high standards, and would not take second rate as acceptable. So I was a bit terrified of him, I remember. Keith Moffat, who became my research supervisor, who's an absolutely brilliant teacher from all points of view, and very supportive. Gosh, who else? Alan Baker, the Fields medalist, who was he died quite recently, very shy and emotionally undeveloped person, a truly great mathematician, truly terrible teacher. Had no idea how to get on with his supervisees at all. I'm just trying to think who else was teaching me at that time.
Was Sir Peter there?
Yes, and he did teach me a bit. Yes. Spinett and Dreyer, as we knew him.
Yeah,
he was the dean. But a very, very clever man, extraordinarily good in all kinds of mathematics, pure and applied. One of the last sort of polymaths, and very, very interesting.
Very shy, though.
Shy.
Well, he didn't talk much.
No, he didn't talk much. But he was like a number of mathematicians, I think. Very, very particular in his way of speaking. But I think very intellectually very powerful. I mean, he was a great head of I forgot what it was called now, the University Grants Committee, I think.
That's right.
Extremely good at that. Yeah. And I think, the disappointment for him was that he had such a small domain at St Catherine's, which he didn't really like. And he used to come to Trinity all the time, for sustenance.
Again, were there other interests you have?
Well, what I'm afraid to say that...
Because you've been boring so far, but there must be a moment when you become...
No, I've always been boring. I did a lot of rowing. I did a great deal, because I discovered at Cambridge, unlike Shrewsbury, that you didn't have to be any good if you were big enough. And I was big enough. So I became a sort of full-time rower, not always at the top of the tree, but it was, 6 days a week.
And usually in the afternoons. Now things have changed. So now rowers go out early in the morning.
Yeah.
We didn't do any of that stuff. If there was a choice between, supervisions and rowing won completely. And it kept me fit, and I was very fit. But also, I met a huge number of people that I wouldn't have met otherwise, who were not mathematicians and therefore not boring. Almost all I've kept up with, for the rest of my life. So I think socially it was really important to me to do that. So in fact, I had two sets of friends. I had my mathematical friends, and I had my rowing friends. So there was a good mix. So I enjoyed my time at Cambridge because I had a good social life, and I was able to get on with my work, so that didn't interfere actually. I mean, I wasn't one of these people who did badly because of rowing. There are plenty of those, but I wasn't one of them. And I went to concerts and things. I mean, I did all that sort of thing, but only as a spectator. I didn't actually, play anything or act in anything.
You didn't get involved with politics or?
Not really. No, as a teenager, I'd been a young liberal without really knowing what that meant. And I had the orange badges, make love, not war, etc. We used to wear those.
So this is about 1967.
Yes, yes, that's right. And but by the time I got to Cambridge, I joined the Cambridge CUNA, it was called, Cambridge University United Nations Association, which then was very active. I thought it was rather good actually. And I'm not sure whether I joined the Liberal Club. I can't remember. I didn't go to many things. I joined the Union Society and went to debates. I'm afraid rowing, drinking and working were really very dull, you see.
Where did you drink?
Where? Almost everywhere I could.
There were many pubs there.
There were many pubs, yes. So yes, okay, I can remember. The pub I used to go to a lot, because it was near here, was in Green Street, the Volunteer.
Oh, yes.
I used to go to that a lot. The Pickerel, which I have friends in Magdalen, and where else did I go? Those two principally, but then there were all the pubs in King Street.
Yes, the King Street Run.
I never did the King Street Run, but I went to some of the pubs. Some of them are still there.
Yeah.
The Eagle, of course.
Yes.
And not much further afield. I mean, students didn't, and still don't, go very far from their colleges.
So at the end of your undergraduate, what did you do?
Okay, so then I graduated, and then I didn't really think about what I wanted to do. It was quite interesting in those days because everybody had a job to go to. There were jobs all over the place, right? It was merely a matter of deciding what interested you.
This is about 68, 69?
No, I came up in 68, so this was 71.
Oh, yes.
And, I'd got firsts in maths, and so the natural thing to do is to go on and do part 3 mathematics in the 4th year, which I did. And I never thought about it. It was the thing to do. My friends were doing it, whereas I could have easily got a job in almost anything, because there were so many jobs going. There was no worry at that time about what sort of job you might get. And I think there was less avarice, perhaps. The idea that the reason you got a job was because you had a good salary was less important relatively than it is for today's students, I believe. Anyway, I didn't go for a job. I did part 3 maths, and then at that time I decided that I should do something a bit different, and I decided after that I would go to America if I could. So I applied to American universities, and I applied for Harkness and Kennedy scholarships, and I got a Kennedy scholarship, which took me to MIT. But before that happened, I had to give up rowing. The reason I gave up rowing was because I crashed my car. I was driving my car without a seatbelt, it wasn't compulsory then, and ran into a truck on a snowy road and broke both my arms. And in consequence I couldn't row. In fact, I couldn't even write. This was very good because I had a friend who's still doing maths who took notes for me on carbon paper, so I could read his well-written notes and I could listen to the lecturer, and I wasn't spending time rowing. And this meant I got the bottom distinction in part 3, which I undoubtedly would not have got had I not crashed my car. So I scraped over the line in part 3, so I had a studentship to do maths here, but I had already decided I wanted to at least try out America, so I did go for a year. I could have gone for 2 years with money, and MIT would have kept me on as a research student had I wanted to do that.
Why didn't you stay on?
Well, a few reasons. I think I had the offer of a studentship in Cambridge, and it was clear that if I was going to stay more than another year at MIT, I would have had to do work, so teach calculus to freshers and actually work my way through a bit. There wasn't a full scholarship available. I had met an American woman whom I later married, who wanted to go to Britain for a bit, and the offer was open from Cambridge, so I decided that was probably a better place. At that time, the Department of Applied Mathematics was really the best in the world, Cambridge one, even better than MIT. So it was I think it was the right decision actually from academic point of view. So I spent my year at MIT. I remember that I didn't have much to do officially, because I went to see my advisor, explained to him that I was going to be here for 1 year or two, but I didn't really see myself going on to a PhD at that time. And he said, what you need is Plan N. And what's Plan N? N stands for nothing, so no examinations. So that was very good. So I could go to lots of courses and not have to be examined. And then I started doing research with a guy called Willem Malkus, who was a senior academic at MIT. And we did some work together, which was later published as my first paper. And that started me off, really, because in fact that paper was the subject of the citation for my Royal Society election. So, it was quite well known in the end. So that was very helpful. And I wouldn't have got that fillip here in Cambridge. I would have been a different path, and you don't know, one doesn't know what the path would have been. So I came back to Cambridge after 1 year to complete my PhD. So I had 2 more years. Is that right? Yes, 2 more years as a PhD student at Cambridge. And was supervised by Keith Moffat, who is still alive, still at Trinity College. Again, a great supervisor. And it was just sort of seamless, except that I knew I had to do computing, and he wasn't any good at computing. So I had to find someone else to help me with that, which I did. There was a postdoc helped me to do the computing side. And after a year, so I thought, well, okay, so if I'm going to go to America at the end of my PhD, then I'd better put in for a fellowship at Trinity early so I could enjoy it if I got it. So I did, and I got it. So the last year of my PhD, I was actually a research fellow. Had I put in a year later, I'd have been in competition with some much better people and wouldn't have got one. So that was another piece of serendipity. So I finished my PhD. I was a fellow of Trinity, but I got a job at MIT. So I went back to MIT, and I was there for 2 years on the staff, which was great fun. And I did, I think, some quite nice work with this guy Malkus and 1 or 2 other people. But at the end of that, there was no tenure available at MIT. So I was made an assistant professor, but without tenure. I had to wait for years and years and years to get tenure, as you know.
You were tenure track.
Well, no, I wasn't, not initially. No. I think, actually the sequence was that I was appointed as something called an instructor, which is not as good as an assistant professor. And then, which was a 2-year job. And then after a few months, I'm trying to think the sequence now, I had been to some summer schools on Cape Cod, so-called geophysical fluid dynamics summer schools, where you're supposed to do a project and give a talk about it. So I went as a graduate student from Britain. I went to do this one summer and produced quite a good project. And at that point, so then I was in the frame and known to some other American academics at different places. So after about 9 months, I was asked to go to Chicago, and I was asked to go to Hopkins with a view to them making me an offer of employment. And I think, I didn't actually get as far as them having made me an offer, but I think they would have done. And at that stage, MIT stepped up and made me an assistant professor in order to keep me. But also at the same stage, it turned out there was a vacancy here. So in fact, there had been 2 vacancies. It was very funny, because the first vacancy was not in my area, it was in relativity. And the person who got the job was Peter Diath, who was a King's student, former King's student. He's still around. And I had this letter from my friend Nigel Weiss, who I'd worked with, who was then a lecturer. And he said, well, yes, there is a vacancy, but you could put your hat in the ring. Fluid mechanics quite well represented, but relativity really needs some more people. So the message was you weren't going to get a job. And then
Keith Moffat himself left to go to Bristol. So that was in my area. And then I got a completely different letter from the head of department advising me to apply. So I did and got the job without an interview, by the way. Those were the days. Well, I was in America, very expensive to bring me across. They knew who I was. Right? It would not have been possible today. So I was offered a job at the best department in the world. So I definitely took that, even though the pay was about half what I'd have got at Hopkins or Chicago.
This is we haven't really defined your field and what your PhD
Yes. Okay. So my field, fluid mechanics, broadly speaking, but within that, magnetohydrodynamics, which is magnetic fields and conducting fluids, with particular interest, in my case, in the Earth and the Sun and the magnetic fields that are produced by them, and in other astrophysical bodies. There's another branch of the theory that deals with electromagnetism in engineering, but I didn't do much of that. So it's an extension of ordinary fluid dynamics. You have to know a bit of fluid dynamics, a bit of electrodynamics, and so on. And Keith Moffat was the person who got me onto this by giving a wonderful lecture course on the subject. That was his field also at that time. He's moved a bit. And it was just inspirational, so I decided this has to be the thing I wanted to do. And when I went to MIT, Malchus was also in that area, so that all worked out very nicely for me. So it's a slightly niche subject, but it meant I was able to teach courses in fluid dynamics as well as more general applied maths, as well as the specialist subject. So that's what brought me back here. So I was the replacement for Moffat in that area. And then Moffat came back, so it was ideal into a different job. So so
you came as an assistant lecturer?
Assistant lecturer, that's right, without tenure initially. But in my department at that time, no assistant lecturer had ever been fired. They'd all been able to step up into vacancies that were made available by people leaving. I was the first one for whom that was not possible because there were no vacancies. Because in the late 70s, if you remember, there was a terrible economic crisis, and all salaries were frozen, and there were no new appointments for years. I was one of the last appointments for about 5 or 6 years in the department. So I was the first person to face having to be promoted in post, which is a possibility. But I managed it. But I remember talking to one of my colleagues about how I was a bit worried about this process, and would I be sacked? He said, well, you don't really need reassurance. You're a psychiatrist, he said. Your promotion is assured, and it was assured. It was fine.
Did you come back to a fellowship at Trinity as well?
Yes. Well, I was a research fellow at Trinity at the time. They allowed you to go away. So I'd gone away for 2 years as a research fellow still. So I came back as a research fellow, but as soon as that happened, I was appointed to a college lectureship, teaching fellowship at Trinity. So that subsumed the one. So then I was a college teaching fellow at Trinity until I left it.
All the way through?
Yes.
Even when you were a vice?
Oh, yes, it was, yeah.
Do you like teaching?
Some of it.
Which bits do you like and which bits do you not like?
Well, I like teaching, I like teaching things I understand, and that's sometimes quite difficult. I like teaching people who are interested, and I'm not very patient with people who don't seem to take things in quickly. So that bit I didn't like, and in the end I didn't like teaching the same thing over and over again. I mean, I don't mind doing it, but when you have to deal with a question that you yourself answered as an undergraduate, which is still appearing on the example sheet 40 years later, the ennui sets in a bit.
Well, there are 3 main branches of Cambridge teaching, which is the supervision, the seminars, and the lecturing.
Yes. Well, okay. So that's supervisions I've been talking about. Lecturing. Yeah, I quite like lecturing. If I do proper preparation, but I was always a bit lazy and didn't prepare properly, so sometimes I was not as good as I could have been. And I don't think I was ever a popular lecturer. Undergraduate was all right. I was never organised enough somehow to be a really popular graduate lecturer, although I did have students, and I did have people in my classes. I wasn't one of these people who win the teaching prize, but I got by.
And again, the division between undergraduate and postgraduate PhD, which did you enjoy?
Oh, well, teaching, research I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the creative stuff, and I enjoyed supervising research students. That was great fun, especially when they were good. And I didn't have all the best ones, but luckily my colleague Nigel Weiss, who I worked with very closely, he had lots of good students and I interacted with them, so that was great.
How many do you think you supervised?
Supervised? About 10, I would think, in my
PhD students.
PhD students. And a number more who weren't my students, but I did stuff with.
And some master's students, presumably?
No, at that time there were no master's courses. There was a Part 3 maths, but that's really like an undergraduate course, with lectures. So no, there were no master's students in maths. So it was very nice. That aspect was very good, and we had a good research group, and it was pleasant socially, and quite a lot of work was done. We did well. We got research grants. It was a very good period.
Did you have to get research grants to?
They're not essential. I mean, I learned that in America it was all very different. So when I went to America in the 70s, I was given an office, and I was told, well, you can use, the telephone is paid for. What? And because I was new and didn't have a grant, the administration graciously allowed me to make outside calls on the telephone, whereas in general, apparently, it would come out of your grant. So, didn't have a grant. So it wasn't essential, and still is not essential for life in the department to have a grant. But if you want students and if you want postdocs, grants are essential. And postdocs are a very important part of pushing on research in applied maths. So I was definitely keen on getting grants, and in general, almost all the time I had one, and postdocs to supervise, which is good.
So you had a lot of postdocs?
Yes, over the years, yes. I mean, jointly with Nigel mainly. But I'm just trying to think if any have become famous. Possibly not. A few who are professors in Leeds. A lot of the people that we worked with, our students, went to Leeds as academics. So if you look at the department there, it's full of people from our research group. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
What was it, chain migration or something?
I think it is, actually. I think, one person goes there and is successful, and the style becomes the style of the group, and then you recruit people with a similar style, and they typically come from Cambridge in those days. It really was a very big applied maths department.
How much was your field international, in the sense of you had to attend many international seminars, conferences, go to Japan, etc., etc.?
There's a lot of travelling. I think my own view is that without conferences it would be a very uninteresting career. Actually, I mean, it's not just the chance to go to interesting places and spend time in the bar. It's to see what everybody else is doing and talk to them in a way you couldn't possibly if you weren't travelling. I didn't do much sort of long-term visits, to work with people for a long term, but I went to a lot of meetings, and then you learn what's going on in the field. So it's absolutely essential to do these things.
Where was the main place you went to? America? Or?
Yes, America. A lot of meetings in America. The particular subject I was interested in actually was done in East Germany also. So I went to East Germany a few times, Czechoslovakia. One meeting in Japan. Where else did I go?
Was this after 1989 or before?
What happened in '89?
Well, the Soviet Union.
Collapsed. I never went. Yes, I never went to the Soviet Union at that time. Poland. I went to, so several Eastern European countries, France. So all over the place, all over Europe and the States. Plus a few outliers. But even in the socialist bloc, there were quite a lot of people who were interested in these subjects.
And then you mentioned your marriage. That lasted 20 years. And eventually she got fed up with me, and that was it. Move on to happier times, because you have a lovely wife now.
Yes.
When did you meet Julia?
So I met her in
Julia.
Yes, Julia in 1997. I think I met her. That was a nice story, because a good friend of mine at Cambridge was married to his wife was twin sister of somebody else who was a doctor who knew Julia in her work in Essex, where she was. And so these two sisters decided that both of us needed, because she was a widow, her husband had died, and that we needed to meet up. So it was sort of
when
blind.
you say she was a widow, do you mean Julia?
Julia was a widow,
right.
when I met her. And Yeah, so we were brought together at an event. And the rest is history. She continued as a doctor until last year.
Yeah.
So she was a doctor. She moved from Essex to Melbourne in Cambridgeshire and remained in practice until last year. She gave it up very quickly. She got fed up with being a doctor.
Well, then moving on to
Yes.
I mean, you go on teaching, and then at some point you get involved in administration through.
Yes. So I was always hated administration. In the maths department, there used to be termly meetings of the staff, and these were dire events.
Just only, you're lucky.
Yeah. Stuff about the curriculum. Everybody had to have a say. The head of department, the first head of department, was not at all bad because he let everybody have a say, but already he'd sewn everything up. So there really wasn't any decision to be made. And we all sort of knew that. And so it was easy to have an argument about it. But his successors weren't as clever as that. And it was just terrible, awful. And I resolved I would never be in administration, certainly not in the department. I did my very best to be incompetent. So I succeeded in that. Until latterly, but in the college, I felt very strongly, and I still feel that you've got to put something into a college to get something out of it. So I was made a tutor at an early age.
And that means you're involved with the sort of social side of students.
Yes, which is something I quite like actually. And in Trinity, we were quite well supplied with money to make the social side work, and so it was okay. And I was a tutor for 15 years. Until I became a reader, when I had to give up that, because that was the rule then. And I really enjoyed that. So I had 100 pupils, and we would rotate through them, of course. And I got to know some people I still know today. It was very friendly, and it made me part of the college. So then there was, I did all the other stuff you would expect young fellows to do. I was on the college council and so on. And at the end of that period, I couldn't be a tutor, but I didn't. Well, actually, I needed the money. I felt I needed a bit more. Tutoring in Trinity was quite well remunerated, so it'd been a big drop in income, even though I'd been promoted at the university. And so I sought to do something about that, and I became the dean, so the equivalent of the lay dean here, disciplinary dean. And I did that for 10 years or more, maybe more, 15. And that was also enjoyable, even though you're only dealing with difficult people. But it kept you in the swing, and kept you talking to students. And also, you became, having been a tutor and having been the dean, you sort of worked out how the college worked, and close to the senior tutor and the other people who ran the college and the bursars. And so you could see what was going on.
How does the college work?
In Trinity or here?
Yes, Trinity.
Very differently from here. It's run by rules.
Really?
Yes.
Written rules?
Well, yes. I mean, there are written rules and there are so-called good customs, which are much more important than written rules.
Yes.
Yeah. But they don't really cover administrative matters, but only,
so
how you dress for
dinner.
dinner.
People know the rules and they mostly obey them.
Yes. So, as an example, what I was astonished to discover in this college is that the allocation of rooms is sort of arbitrary and at the whim of the Vice Provost. Whereas in Trinity, the Vice Provost, the Vice Master, writes a letter about room application to people, but it's actually run elsewhere. And the way it's run is very simple. A room is vacant, you apply if you want it, if you're entitled to it, so you have to, certain sorts of room are reserved for people who are actually doing teaching. If you're senior to anybody else who applies, you get the room. That's it. No argument.
And senior is when you came to the college?
When you came to the college.
Yeah.
Well, when you became a fellow, actually.
Yeah.
And, it works. There's no argument. Everybody accepts that this is the rule. And it seems to me, I think I can say this quietly, because I think the two Vice Provosts I've dealt with.
Quietly, you're saying it to the world, but anyway.
But both Rob Wallach, who was the first Vice Provost I worked with, and Nick Marston, I've asked them both, don't you think it would be a good idea to institute some sort of rule that would make your life easier? But they don't seem to want to do this.
They enjoy it. Bit of power. So that's one rule. What were the other main rules that really
were useful? Well, I think the other thing that was distinctive was that we were well paid for teaching, but we were expected to do 6 hours of teaching. And people did, without complaint. And I don't understand how that was made to work, but it did work.
And that included readers and professors?
Oh, well, latterly, yes. So readers and professors do 4 hours, I think, at Trinity, but the junior one's 6. And get more money for doing the 6 than they would for doing the 4. So the pricing structure was different, but it was just accepted. There was no, you didn't have. There are some people in this college who enjoy being at the college, but don't see that part of the job is to do a lot of teaching. And I know that successive provosts and senior tutors have had difficulty with this and finding the right people to do the teaching. And I think it's a problem at King's that at some point will have to be dealt with, because it's getting harder and harder to get young people to commit to lots of teaching. So there has to be a structure which will make people feel happy about doing the teaching that's needed.
Why were they so happy at Trinity?
Well, I don't.
I mean, was it the pay? Or
the pay was good, but somehow there was a general understanding that this was what was required, and people were not rebellious.
And everyone else is doing it, so you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a financial penalty, a big one if you didn't do it, and people would wonder why you were falling down on the job. And the people who were falling down on the job were named at the council every year.
Really?
Yes. So that was, but I mean, there were very few. So I don't know why it's different, because I don't know enough of the history of King's to know why that is so different, because you'd think it would be very similar. And of course there are lots of fellows of King's who do more than their required teaching and do it gratefully and realise why they're doing it. It's very good. It's just that there isn't a mechanism for making it universally accepted that this is what you do.
I mean, the image from here, because I've never been more than a director of studies at Trinity briefly and so on, is that it's a somewhat more formal.
Oh, it's very much more formal. No, I love Trinity. I mean, I don't want to suggest to you that I hated it. I liked it very much, and I wouldn't have moved except to come to a wonderful place like this. But it is more formal, and
so people dressed more formal.
Dress more formal, and still dress more formal.
And in meetings they talked to the Provost, the Master.
Oh yes. So an example of a difference is, so students at Trinity would never address me by my first name without my telling them it was okay. Whereas my first interaction with a King's student was from Gideon Farrell, who was then president of KCSU, wrote to me, "Dear Mike," out of the blue. And I realised immediately it was a different world. But that's fine. I'm quite relaxed about that. But it is a difference. I remember going to Trinity and getting letters from my tutor addressed "Dear Proctor." And I thought, having been at school where I was "Dear Proctor," I thought, surely they've moved on from this a bit. But then I realised it was a term of endearment, because I'd been outside the college, "Dear Mr. Proctor." The lack of Mr. meant I was on the inside.
Same happened to me.
Yes, I'm sure. Yes.
Was there more of a tradition of everyone going in for lunches and dinners and things like that?
Yes, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who went in for lunch. Probably a greater proportion than here, but I'm not sure. I think a lot of people come to lunch here, actually. It doesn't seem so different. What was very different, of course, was that the fellows sat at a separate table with different food.
Yeah.
And lunches, when I first arrived, were quite elaborate. You didn't need dinner after you'd had lunch. So that was different. And the whole structure of the place with the dais in the hall and high tables, which really were high, made it very different. And at dinner, the students would have to stand up for the grace. But I understand this happened too until quite recently here, until 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. So I'm not at all unhappy at how it works here. I think it's fine. And I think, each college should have its own traditions and be pleased with them. And that's what makes things interesting at Cambridge. And out at Oxford too, the colleges are individual with individual ways of working. But I think, yes, if you like wearing ties, Trinity is a better place to go than King's, put it that way.
Although your PA tells me you often wear ties.
I do wear ties. So this is very boring stuff, isn't it? I do wear a tie with a gown, because I find it odd to wear a gown without a tie still. And I do wear a tie when I'm meeting older people, because they often wear ties too, and it's better to be overdressed than underdressed. Yes.
So moving on, why did you decide to come to King's?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I shouldn't say so. Everybody in the world now starts every sentence with so, so I mustn't do it.
Really interesting, irritating.
Yes, irritating to me now, so I must stop. Okay, so I had not thought of going anywhere else or doing anything other than being Vice Master, although it would have been nice to be thought of as a possible candidate as Master of Trinity, but that was never going to happen. And
is this because it's a royal appointment? Or?
Well, actually, as Vice Master, I helped to draw up the rules when it ceased to be a royal appointment. So the present Master was elected by the Fellows.
Really?
It's nominally a royal appointment, but we sent one candidate to the palace. And so I didn't get involved. I mean, I was. Some people said, "Would you like to be Master?" I said, "Oh, well, of course I would," but I didn't get beyond the first hurdle. So I realised that was never going to happen. And then I was Vice Master, and that seemed to go quite well. People seemed to think I did a good job, and it was more of a job, really, apart from the rooms business. It was more of a job there than here, because the Master is a sort of remote figure who doesn't get involved in writing papers or anything. You know, it's just a high-level chair, off and away doing important business for the Royal Society or whatever. So I had some experience that was relevant to this job and to other jobs as head of house. And suddenly, somebody in Trinity, Boyd Hilton, historian,
I know him, yes.
A great friend, he's great. He said, "Well, of course, the only reason you're doing this is because you want to be head of house." And I thought, no. But then thinking about it again, I thought, well, maybe I could do these things, you know. And I thought about that. And then I was very ill. And in fact, at about the same time as I became Vice Master, I was very ill. I had a terrible immune system problem. I nearly died. I was in hospital for a month. And of course I had a lot of time to think about things, and whether I should just carry on doing what I was doing, which would be very easy to go on for the next 10 years as a professor and end up retired, or to do something different. So I became Vice Master. So then I got this feeling that I could perhaps be thought of as a head of house, and then one or two opportunities arose. So I was interviewed at Keys and actually shortlisted at Keys. I was also shortlisted at Magdalen, but didn't get it because of the Archbishop, which again I think suits him better than it would have suited me. But that would have been quite pleasant, actually. I would quite enjoyed being at Magdalen for completely different reasons than here. It was a very friendly and small place. You could have got on with lots of other things as well. And then there was another place, another college, where it invited applications. I thought, well, I've been shortlisted twice, I will write in and say I'm interested. Rejected immediately. How odd, yes. and then of course there was the King's job. Suddenly somebody said to me, have you thought about King's as a possible place to be head of house? And I had not thought about King's. You know, from where I stood, King's seemed to be disorganized, chaotic, and difficult. And I couldn't imagine how it would be possible to be head of house there and enjoy it. But I persevered and allowed my name to be put forward. And as you know, the rest is history. So I had of course, as soon as I arrived here, as a potential candidate, I realised people weren't barking mad, and it was a lovely place, and there was an enormous amount. You could see there were things that could be done, because people were not wholly confident that things were being done correctly, and so there was an opportunity to make a difference. And of course, the opportunity to be in a place with the chapel and all the rest of the history was just wonderful. So I was very pleased to be a candidate, and I'm very pleased to be Provost.
What did you, or do you particularly like about being Provost?
I like about being Provost? Well, I like feeling that I've helped people, and I like positive feedback, and as long as I'm getting the positive feedback, I'm really enjoying myself. Of course, were I to do something terrible and be roundly criticised, that would make it much less pleasant, but that has not yet happened to any significant degree. So I've enjoyed getting people to get along. I think I've managed to reduce the amount of anger that I did see at early congregations before I was provost. People seem more relaxed and better prepared to get on with what they should be getting on with, what they want to get on with, their research and teaching, rather than worrying about fights in the college, as it were. I think it was plain when I arrived that there'd been a long period, actually, I don't know how long, but some period at which details had been forgotten about. So there were gaps in the governance, which made it, in some ways, rather attractive, because the provost could do anything, because there was nothing to stand in his way. But on the other hand, not satisfactory, because nobody knew where they stood in relation to certain things. So I've tried to help with that. I've tried to make the governance of the college more transparent. The fellows now know what the council is talking about, rather than what it didn't know before. And I think and I've also enjoyed actually going out and getting money, which has been moderately successful thanks to the development director. We have been quite successful in that, so that some transformational gifts have arrived, especially recently, and so we can get on and do some of the things we want to do as a college. I mean, the money for access, which is, well, the donor is not public yet, but I think it's known that there is a lot of money has come to the college to be spent on access initiatives, is going to put us in the forefront of that area, which is something that is part of our ethos anyway. So that's all entirely satisfactory.
And did you find the students were easy to work with?
Yes, I haven't. Oh, the student. Yes, okay. So I've done some teaching of students, and they're math students in Kings are just like math students in Trinity. I found them very easy to get along with. They were absolutely fine. The student representatives on the council, we didn't have that structure at Trinity, so it was quite interesting to see the students. In general, they've been wonderful. The first couple of years, there were some quite difficult people, student reps. The last 2 years has been absolutely tremendous, really constructive engagement, and we've been able to do what they want, and they've been helpful to us. And so I think I don't know if we turned the corner, but if you can offer the students the knowledge that they are being listened to, then you don't get representatives of the students who say that the fellows are against us and we must have radical demonstrations in all directions. And so far, touch wood, we haven't had any difficult demonstrations.
One of the things which put off people like me from administration is the thought that it'll cut away the energy and time for research and writing and so on.
Well, it's true. I mean, if you want to do your research full time, you shouldn't be a fellow of a college. But
what about being provost? Do you have time?
Oh well, it's an administrative job.
Do you have time for
a little bit? A little bit. I have one student who is finishing very soon, I hope, after 4 years, and I have a couple of collaborators, and we're still doing some research, but it's very part time. And I've retired from the university, and so I don't have any obligation to do anything.
Have you?
And I don't miss it actually. Having spent years, as vice master, and then here, basically on a part-time basis in the department. I wasn't full-time research for some time, but I don't miss it because I don't think that. I've done some work. I'm a fellow of the Royal Society. I'm never going to do such good work again. So it's a matter of pleasing myself rather than doing anything important. So I'll do it when I can.
I mean, it's often said of pure mathematicians that they do most of their best work before 30. Is this true of applied mathematics?
I wouldn't say so necessarily, but by my great age, yes, you're definitely going downhill. I think one thing that's changed in my subject is the advent of lots of computing for almost every part of the subject, and unless you're very good at numerical analysis, you don't make the progress that you didn't need to make in the past, because in the past you just did pen and paper stuff, and that was quite sufficient, but that's not good enough anymore. So I'm a bit of an old fogey when it comes to computers. Other people do the computing for me.
So this is more or less a penultimate question. I mean, this is a very appropriate moment. This is September 2018, and you're just about to start, am I right, in another 5 years?
Another 5 years, yes.
As Provost, so you've been here for 5 years. you're in your second term as president. In other words, there's no chance of
re-election.
You can do what you like. So what is your dream for the next 5 years? What would you really like to do?
Well, I think there are a number of things where the college ought to have some strategy. And I've talked about this, as you know, before in other contexts. And I think what I'm trying to do is to introduce a discussion, for example, on how we organise our teaching and how it's remunerated and how we incentivise people to do the teaching the college needs. How we spend the money that we've allocated to research. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do more imaginative things. This again has been talked about, but as always in these situations, there's a lot of talk. And no one is prepared to sit down and say, right, here's a proposal. So what my aim is to make proposals which can be shot down, I don't mind, but at least start a more concrete conversation that might lead to change. I would like to think that we can build this wonderful proposed auditorium in Chetwynd Court. I'd be most gratified if that came to pass before I left. And that means a lot of fundraising, and the outcome is not at all certain. So that would be very good. I mean, I think it's one project. Building projects are always difficult because there's a lot of, like in Gibbs, the Gibbs building refurbishment. You know, if we had all the money, then many fellows would agree reluctantly to quit their sets for a year or two to get it done. But without the money, there's no prospect of the college putting its own money. The fellows won't agree because they like it how it is and they don't see the point. And I can understand that completely. But with Chetwynd, this is something really new that many of the fellows are really in favour of, and they can see how it will transform the way we organise our seminars, and it also bring in a bit of money, of course, from conferences. So it's altogether a good thing. And because it's one thing that the fellows can almost unite about, it's one thing we really need to pursue in the future. So I'm very keen on pushing that forward, and that will be our plan. And of course, there's a fundraising campaign which will include this among many other things, starting in December. Yes. And the Director of Development and I retire on the same day. So it's our joint attempt to finish our careers.
You're hoping your aim is 100 million, isn't it? Or 50
It's 100 million. We've raised over 50 million if you count the right way. And the aim is 100 million, yes.
Good.
So I think, it's somebody said, well, you surely don't want to carry on for another 5 years. But having done 5 years, I realised when I'd done 4 years, I've only just arrived. I've just done a few things, nothing has happened, and I couldn't just step down then. So hopefully I'll have more focused thinking about the next 5 years. And I think when I first arrived, I didn't know anything about the college, and I didn't know what people would go along with, but I feel I do know a fair amount now. I know the characters, and I know most of the ethos, I think. And different people have different views, but you work with different people to get different things done. And in general, my feeling is that people accept that the sort of things that are being proposed are what they want, and there's no rebellion at congregations. And so I think so far so good.
So far so good. As you know, I have a particular interest in China, and this college is now
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Very famous. Do you think this is something you would like to pursue in the next 5 years?
Well, I think inevitably we're going to have to deal more with China. We all have our slight caveats about some of the reasons. I mean, for fundraising reasons, it's obviously good to be connected with China, but it's a different world than your United States benefactor. It's not philanthropy exactly, and you have to manage the money in relation to the demands that might be made. And I'm a novice at this, but I hope to learn more. So I haven't yet been to mainland China for the college. I've been, as you know, recently to Zhenjiang, the vinegar capital of China. but that was nothing to do with fundraising. So I will do more of that. And I think one has to deal with China. They will be everywhere quite soon, and we should be there too. So that's my feeling about it. Yeah.
That's a nice thought, but I usually end by saying, is there anything that you would have liked me to have asked
you? Which I didn't get to answer. That's interesting.
You've talked about your family.
I've talked about my family. No, I don't
I don't think so, really. No, I think I've covered everything that seems important. I'm just trying to think there's anything missed in my earlier life. I don't think so. No, I think really we've covered almost everything of importance, which is good.
And you're no longer a boring person.
I still feel quite boring.
Modesty is your middle name, Mike. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.
That was very nice.